There is exactly one sentence that, when delivered correctly, can stop a narcissist mid-pattern in a way that hours of arguing, pleading, or explaining never managed to accomplish. And today I want to walk you through what that sentence actually is, why it works so effectively when almost nothing else does, and how to understand the psychology behind it deeply enough that you can wield it with real precision instead of just repeating words you don't fully understand the power of. Before I give you the sentence itself, I need you to understand something important, because without this context, the sentence will sound almost too simple to matter, and simplicity is exactly what makes people underestimate its power. Narcissists build their entire relational strategy around one core assumption: that the people around them will keep negotiating, keep explaining, keep trying to be understood, keep hoping that if they just find the right words, the right evidence, the right emotional appeal, the narcissist will finally see reason and change. This assumption is what fuels years of arguments that go nowhere, years of explanations that get twisted, years of emotional appeals that get weaponized right back against the person making them. The sentence I'm about to give you works precisely because it refuses to participate in this entire structure. It doesn't argue. It doesn't explain. It doesn't appeal to reason or emotion at all. It simply, calmly states a fact about what happens next. And in doing so, it removes the one thing a narcissist's entire strategy depends on: your continued engagement in a negotiation they were always going to win. The sentence is this: I don't need you to understand. I just need you to know I'm done explaining. Say that again, slowly, and really sit with what it actually communicates. Because on the surface it sounds simple, almost anticlimactic, but underneath, it's doing something genuinely sophisticated. It withdraws the resource a narcissist depends on most: your ongoing effort to be understood, to be validated, to be agreed with, without requiring their permission, their acknowledgement, or their participation in order to be true. This is exactly why it destabilizes a narcissist so effectively. It doesn't hand them anything to argue against, because there's no claim inside it to dispute. You're not saying they're wrong. You're not saying they're a bad person. You're simply, factually, describing your own decision, and decisions about your own behavior aren't something they can successfully contest, no matter how skilled they are at contesting almost everything else. To understand why this specific sentence lands with such force, you have to understand what narcissists actually do with your explanations once you offer them, because this is where most people's instincts betray them completely. When you explain yourself to a narcissist, why you're upset, why a boundary matters, why their behavior hurt you, you're operating under the assumption that explanation leads to understanding, and understanding leads to change. This is how healthy relationships generally work, and it's a completely reasonable assumption to bring into any relationship. But narcissists don't process explanations as information to be understood. They process explanations as material to be used, dissected for weaknesses, mined for concessions, searched for any small inconsistency that can be leveraged to shift blame back onto you. Every explanation you offer becomes raw material for their next counterargument, which is exactly why these conversations tend to spiral endlessly, with you doing more and more work to be understood while somehow ending up more confused, more exhausted, and more doubtful of your own position than when the conversation started. This is precisely what makes "I don't need you to understand, I just need you to know I'm done explaining" so disarming. It removes the raw material entirely. There's no explanation left to dissect, no reasoning left to counter, no vulnerable, detailed account of your feelings left to twist into evidence of your instability. You've stated your position and simultaneously announced that the negotiation phase is over, and a narcissist without material to work with is a narcissist whose usual tools simply don't have anything to grip onto. I want to walk you through what typically happens when someone delivers this sentence, because understanding the predictable reaction helps you prepare for it rather than being caught off guard by it. The first response is almost always an attempt to draw you back into exactly the explanation you just declined to continue offering. Well, what do you mean by that? You can't just say that and walk away. I think I deserve to understand what I supposedly did. This reaction isn't confusion. It's an attempt to reopen the exact door you just closed, because reopening it restores their access to the material they need. The correct response to this attempt isn't a fuller explanation. It's simply repeating some version of the same sentence, calmly, without escalating, without justifying further. I understand you'd like an explanation, and I'm still done offering one. This repetition, which we discussed in an earlier conversation as the broken record technique, works specifically because it refuses to be pulled back into the negotiation, no matter how many different angles the narcissist tries in their attempt to reopen it. The second common response is an escalation into emotional intensity, designed either to guilt you back into full engagement or to destabilize you enough that you abandon the boundary out of sheer discomfort. This might look like tears, accusations of cruelty, a sudden pivot to their own pain, and how unfairly they're being treated. I want you to understand something important about this escalation. It is not evidence that your sentence was wrong or unkind. It's evidence that your sentence worked, that it successfully removed a resource they were relying on, and that this removal is producing exactly the kind of destabilization we discussed in earlier conversations about what happens when a narcissist's usual tools stop functioning as expected. The discomfort you feel watching this escalation unfold is real, and it's genuinely difficult to sit through, but sitting through it without re-engaging is precisely what determines whether the sentence actually accomplishes what it's designed to accomplish. The third response, and this one is worth understanding specifically because it can be the most disorienting, is a sudden, superficial agreement, an abrupt, "Fine, you're right, I understand," that seems to concede the point entirely, only to have the exact same pattern resurface days or weeks later as though the conversation never happened. This response isn't genuine acceptance. It's a strategic retreat, a recognition that this particular approach isn't working right now, combined with an expectation that enough time will pass for the old pattern to become viable again. Understanding this in advance prevents you from mistaking a temporary retreat for actual change, and prevents you from lowering your guard simply because the immediate conversation appeared to resolve more easily than you expected. I want to talk now about why this specific sentence works so much better than the alternatives most people instinctively reach for in these exact moments, because understanding the contrast matters enormously for actually using this tool correctly. Many people, in the heat of finally trying to establish a boundary, reach for something that sounds similar on the surface but functions completely differently underneath. Sentences like, "You never listen to me," or "You always do this," or "I need you to finally understand how much you've hurt me." These sentences, however emotionally honest and understandable, actually hand the narcissist exactly what they need because they contain claims that can be argued against, evidence that can be selectively challenged, absolutes that can be picked apart by pointing to a single counterexample. "You never listen" invites the response, "That's not true. Remember that one time." "I need you to understand" invites an entire performance of pretend understanding that never actually translates into changed behavior. The sentence we're focusing on today avoids all of these traps specifically because it makes no claim about them at all. It's entirely, exclusively a statement about you, what you need, what you're doing going forward, and statements about your own behavior are not something a narcissist can successfully dispute, no matter how skilled they've become at disputing almost everything else you've ever said to them. This sentence we're focusing on today avoids all of these traps specifically because it makes no claim about them at all. It's entirely, exclusively a statement about you, what you need, what you're doing going forward, and statements about your own behavior are not something a narcissist can successfully dispute, no matter how skilled they've become at disputing almost everything else you've ever said to them. And this is exactly where I want to take the rest of our conversation, because knowing the sentence is only the beginning. Learning to actually hold it, live inside it, and let it reshape the entire dynamic going forward is where the real transformation happens. and that requires understanding what comes after you say it, not just the moment you finally do. The first thing worth understanding is what this sentence actually protects once it's spoken, because its power doesn't end the moment it leaves your mouth. It extends into every future interaction, quietly changing the terms of the relationship, even in conversations that have nothing to do with the original conflict. Once you've established that you're done explaining, done negotiating your own reality, done offering endless material for them to dissect, you've fundamentally shifted what the relationship requires of you going forward. This shift doesn't need to be announced again every single time. It becomes a kind of internal reference point, something you can return to silently whenever old patterns try to pull you back into the exhausting cycle of justification. The sentence isn't just a single moment of resistance. It's a foundation you can stand on repeatedly without needing to rebuild it from scratch every time the same old dynamic tries to resurface. The second thing to understand is why this particular kind of boundary tends to produce longer-lasting change in how a narcissist approaches you specifically, even if it never produces the deeper, more meaningful change you might have once hoped for in the relationship as a whole. Narcissists, at their core, are remarkably efficient at redirecting their efforts toward whatever pathway actually produces results. If explaining, arguing, and appealing to your emotions consistently fail to reopen the negotiation you've closed, while other approaches, with other people or in other contexts, continue working, their behavior toward you specifically tends to shift, not out of respect exactly, but out of a kind of practical recalibration. You become, in their internal calculation, a less viable target for the specific tactics that used to work so reliably. This doesn't mean they stop being who they are. It means they learn through repeated failure that this particular door doesn't open the way it used to, and narcissists, whatever else you can say about them, tend to be remarkably attentive to which doors are actually still open. The third thing worth understanding is how to prepare yourself internally for the discomfort that inevitably follows delivering this sentence. Because knowing the words isn't the same as being ready for what happens in your own body and mind once you've said them. You will likely feel, in the immediate aftermath, an intense pull to soften what you just said, to add an explanation after all, to reassure them that you still care even while holding the boundary, to somehow make the sentence gentler than its power actually requires it to be. I need you to understand that this pull is old conditioning, not new wisdom. It's the same conditioning that taught you, over years, that directness needed to be cushioned, that boundaries needed justification in order to be acceptable, that your own needs required extensive explanation before they could be considered valid. Resisting this pull, sitting with the discomfort of having said something clean and unqualified without immediately undoing its cleanliness through unnecessary softening, is genuinely one of the hardest parts of using this sentence effectively. And it gets easier specifically through repetition, through proving to yourself again and again that you can survive the discomfort of a boundary that doesn't apologize for itself. The fourth thing, and this one requires real honesty, is understanding that this sentence, however powerful, is not a guarantee of a specific outcome, and holding it with that expectation sets you up for disappointment that has nothing to do with whether you used it correctly. Some narcissists, faced with this kind of clean, unshakable boundary, genuinely do recalibrate their behavior, at least toward you specifically, because the old tactics have demonstrably stopped working. Others, particularly those with more deeply entrenched patterns, escalate further, searching for new angles, new vulnerabilities, new ways to reopen a door you've worked hard to close. The sentence's power was never actually about guaranteeing their transformation. It was about reclaiming your own position, regardless of what they do in response. This distinction matters enormously because measuring the sentence's success by their reaction keeps you dependent on their behavior for your own sense of whether you did the right thing, when the actual measure of success is much simpler and much more within your control. Did you hold the boundary? Or did you abandon it the moment holding it became uncomfortable? The fifth thing worth understanding, and this is perhaps the most important reframe of everything we've discussed today, is what this sentence actually represents underneath its specific wording. Not a clever tactic borrowed from a psychology conversation, but a genuine internal shift in your relationship with your own worth. You cannot deliver this sentence convincingly, cannot hold it under pressure, cannot resist the pull to soften it into something negotiable again, unless some part of you has already arrived at a deeper, more foundational truth that your own peace matters enough to protect, even when protecting it disappoints someone else. Even when protecting it means letting a conversation end without the resolution you might have once believed you needed. The sentence isn't the source of this power. It's simply the linguistic expression of power you've already, quietly, begun building somewhere underneath the words themselves. I want to say something directly now to anyone listening who's been carrying years of exhausting circular conversations, who's spent countless hours explaining, justifying, defending their own perception to someone who was never actually going to receive any of it in good faith. You do not need a longer explanation. You do not need better evidence. You do not need to finally find the perfect combination of words that makes them see what you've been trying to show them for years. What you need, more than any of that, is permission to stop trying, permission to close a door that was never actually going to open the way you hoped it would, permission to let your own clarity be enough, even without their agreement, even without their understanding, even without the acknowledgement you may have spent years quietly hoping would eventually arrive. So picture this, the way we often close these conversations, not a dramatic confrontation staged for maximum impact, not a rehearsed speech delivered with trembling resolve in front of an audience, but something quieter, something that reflects how this kind of power actually tends to show up in real life. Picture an ordinary conversation, one that starts the way so many others have before it, with the same old pull toward justification, the same familiar demand for you to explain yourself one more time, and picture yourself, instead of following that familiar script, simply saying the sentence calmly, without anger, without drama, without anything trailing behind it that dilutes its clarity. I don't need you to understand. I just need you to know I'm done explaining. And then picture yourself doing something that might feel, the first few times, almost unbearably difficult. Simply stopping there, not adding anything, not softening it, not chasing their reaction to see whether it landed the way you hoped. Just letting the sentence exist, complete and whole, exactly as it is. Because that is the real, quiet, cinematic truth beneath everything we've explored today. The sentence that makes a narcissist think twice was never actually about finding the perfect words to finally defeat them in an argument you'd already spent years losing. It was about discovering that you never actually needed to win that argument at all, because your own reality was never something that required their verdict to be true. And the moment you can say those words and mean them completely, without needing anything back from the person hearing them, is the exact moment you realize something that changes everything that comes after it. You were never actually fighting for their understanding this whole time. You were fighting for your own permission to finally stop needing it.